Hello, everyone, and welcome, welcome, welcome. Good afternoon or good morning, whenever you're joining us today. Thank you so much for taking time out of your busy day to join us for episode number 2 in our micro series with LabStat and CannDelta. My name is Rachel Colic, and I will be your host for today. The next hour is going to be jam-packed with valuable insights on Health Canada inspections and maintaining your compliance requirements, which is really important stuff here today. And we've got the 2 experts who are going to tell you all about it. And stay with us after the main stage for breakout networking sessions with our esteemed speakers and other experts from their organizations. So gather your burning questions and stick with us after, and you'll be able to ask them one-on-one to our experts today. So before we get started, let me tell you a little bit about our sponsors. LabStat and their sister company LabSmart are part of a network of best-in-class companies across North America, converging to simplify analytical testing and regulatory compliance for your business. This alliance provides you with comprehensive testing, consulting, training, and auditing services to ensure proactive compliance at all levels with one phone call. That's the LabStat advantage. CannDelta is a cannabis regulatory consulting company that understands the necessity of continuous change and innovation in the cannabis industry. And they support their clients to help them stay compliant within the existing and ever-changing legal framework. With extensive regulatory and scientific backgrounds, many of their consultants have previously worked at Health Canada's medical cannabis program and inspectorate labs, so you're really getting the insider information today. So our esteemed speakers from CannDelta and Lab Stat today. Dario Yaganovich is a senior consultant and the director of federal licensing at CannDelta. For the past 3 years, he has been working closely with clients, assisting them in entering the Canadian cannabis space, including micros, standards, and publicly traded companies. He's an expert in the areas of good production practices, licensing strategy, license management, and compliance. Dario holds a master's degree in pharmaceutical science from the University of Toronto and bachelor's degree in organic chemistry from York University. Devin Sears is the Director of Research and Development at LabStat and LabSmart. There, Devin is responsible for the development and validation of new analytical methodologies used for product testing across the cannabis and natural health product portfolios. Devin has a PhD in physical chemistry from the University of Illinois at Chicago. And prior to joining LabStat in 2019, he spent more than a decade as a senior research scientist developing analytical methodologies for the assessment of active pharmaceutical ingredients. So 2 very smart people here today to help you learn all about inspections and maintaining compliance. So without further ado, I'm going to pass the mic to Dario.
Hi, and thank you for joining us today. I'm excited to talk to you a little bit about Health Canada inspections. This is going to be a crash course in preparing you for your Health Canada inspection coming up, understanding how to prepare for it, who's going to be conducting it, and what the expectations are from regulators. So our company is a leading cannabis scientific and regulatory consulting firm headed up by former Health Canada employees. And with that, our CEO, Sherry Boudrum, is a former senior compliance and enforcement officer at Health Canada. So she was one of the inspectors in the cannabis program who worked to make sure that all of the license holders under the ACMPR and the MMPR program were maintaining compliance throughout their activities. So who better to inform you on the ins and outs of a compliance inspection other than a former inspector herself? So you might ask, what is a cannabis inspection? So Health Canada conducts regular inspections of all of their federally licensed cannabis producers to make sure that they're continuously meeting compliance with the provisions of the Cannabis Act and the cannabis regulations. So a Health Canada compliance and enforcement officer will conduct a site inspection of your site, either on site or through virtual inspections now of your facility to ensure that your operations involving cannabis are maintaining compliance. And they will record their findings in an inspections report, which they will provide to you with observations on your overall level of compliance. So they will evaluate your overall level of compliance as compliant or non-compliant based on these observations and their severity. It is up to the license holder and their responsibility to respond to the officer's observations with the corrective actions and preventative measures in place in order to appropriately address all of the observations. So when will I be inspected, you might ask? So there's three different types of primary inspections. So you're going to be looking at a general compliance inspection. So that's a random inspection where Health Canada will contact you 2 to 4 weeks ahead of the inspection. It can happen anytime and usually happens about once per year. It could be longer than that for, particularly micros in more rural areas. There's also a targeted inspection, which is a planned inspection. And this is in direct response to something like a complaint, an adverse event, or a recall situation. So Health Canada will contact you and schedule an inspection in accordance with that and focus on that specific issue in that case. Finally, a sales inspection for processors is another planned inspection, and that happens at the conclusion of a sales amendment application. So Health Canada will come in and inspect your facility, oftentimes for the first time, in order for you to achieve your sales amendment as a processor. So what is the focus of a cannabis inspection? So for this particular talk, I will be talking specifically about general compliance inspections as well as sales amendment inspections. And so with that, there's a few key areas that are going to be looked at. And this is primarily important for first-time license holders that are getting inspected. So there's three key areas that they're going to be looking at during your inspection. That's good production practices, or GPP, record keeping, and security. So I'll go into detail about each one of these and talk to you about how to prepare for each. So with GPP, good production practices are a set of standards and operating protocols in your facility that is all catered towards providing and producing high quality and safe products for consumption. And so with that, that considers things like your facility's construction, your internal operations, the training of your staff, et cetera. And so with that, Health Canada will look at one of the first things that they can visually see at your site during an inspection and a walkthrough, which will be your facility's construction and overall maintenance. So you want to make sure that your facility's maintenance schedule is being kept up to date, that you're identifying any kinds of deficiencies like cracks or seams inside your walls and your floors, and you're continuously maintaining those, as well as changing things like your filters at an appropriate rate in accordance with that program. So that moves down into sanitation, which is another very important consideration for GPP, where you want to make sure that all of your cleaning logs and all of your cleaning activities are being done in accordance with a master cleaning schedule that's approved by either your QAP or your other quality staff. And then product flow is important too, when you're ensuring that your facility is organized in a manner that reduces clutter, that there's no loose trash or waste materials, and that it provides a conducive environment for the adequate flow of your personnel as well as your products. So one area that they'll focus on particularly will be your secure storage. So they want to make sure that your storage is organized in a manner that allows you to very easily identify all of the different types of cannabis materials that are stored there. So you're going to have raw materials, you're going to have in-process materials, you're going to have released materials, you're going to have contaminated materials, retention samples, testing samples, et cetera. So all of those different types of materials should be properly labeled, segregated, and easily identifiable by any of your staff. I always suggest that a great way to do this is through color coding. So you can put stickers on each of these different types of materials. You should also have a very intuitive racking system where you can very quickly through your inventory log be able to identify any of these materials appropriately. And so one of the things that might actually fall behind when you're considering GPP is things like calibration logs, for example. This might be a little bit more minor, but it does quickly generate a minor or a major observation in an inspection, where you want to make sure that your scales are calibrated accordingly, especially on the days that you conduct production, so that they're providing accurate results. And then as well, that leads into your other tools and your equipment. So you want to make sure that those are also being kept clean, that they're properly identified as being clean or contaminated, and that you're not mixing up tools and equipment in between different production runs for cross-contamination. Overall, Health Canada will also pay attention to your staff within the facility and ensure that they are abiding by the correct PPE protocols. So you want to make sure that they're wearing the proper gloves, hair nets, beard nets, et cetera, as dictated by your standard operating procedures. So this is a few of the areas of GPP that you should probably focus on during an inspection. There are many more considerations here, which include quality assurance and testing, but these are the big ones to focus on at a high level during a walkthrough. So true or false, microcultivators and processors have less requirements for complying with good production practices in comparison to standard cultivators and processors. So, I mean, this is certainly false. Microprocessors and cultivators have exactly the same requirements in maintaining GPP as their standard level counterparts. The challenge with micros is that you have a more limited staff. And so staff have to wear many hats and they have to have multiple responsibilities for each team member. So it's very important to clearly identify what the roles are for each specific team member and ensure that each one of them is consistently executing on those tasks. So micros do benefit from the limited inventory and smaller facility sizes overall, which allows for better control. But the responsibilities are distributed amongst a smaller group of people. And so everybody plays a very integral role. So these are some examples of bad production practices. And going from the top left over here, you're going to see, a rusty drainage cover over there in an operations area. That's an obvious source of contamination to your products. Your maintenance schedule should be able to identify that and ensure that it's cleared up. Next, over to the right there in the middle is going to be a bin of it seems like cannabis material. This was actually found sitting in a transit area in the middle of a hallway. The box is unlabeled, the container is unsealed, and we don't know what this is. Is it waste material? Is it actual viable material? Where is it going? Where is it intended for? And plus, it's not being stored in a secure storage, and it was there for a significant amount of time. So you're going to want to make sure that you don't have any unlabeled cannabis in your facility during an inspection, especially. Everything should have a lot number beside it or some kind of color coding or designation to make sure that you can identify it easily. Over on the top left over there, you'll see within a secure storage, there's a bunch of these little jars that are intended to be research materials, but you'll see that the labeling is quite inconsistent. Some of them have lot numbers, some of them don't, some are smudged off. So it's very important if you do have these types of materials that you practice good labeling and good documentation practices so you can very easily trace back what these items are and what they're intended for. And as well, keeping the net weight on there is really easy to keep track of your inventory as well. On the bottom right, on the bottom left over there, should I say, is a collection of different bags with cannabis materials in it. These were, again, research items that are intended for destruction, but they're all kind of cluttered together. And these were, first of all, very poorly organized, but number two, they were also kept outside of storage. This was actually in a destruction room that was not an authorized secure storage area. So making sure that anything that's kept over 24 hours in storage is kept inside an authorized secure storage area in this case, and as well that there's the proper labeling on it for traceability. So moving over to the right there, there's a wall that has a crack in the middle. So again, your facility maintenance program should identify any of these cracks and seams as they come up, and they should be sealed up in order to prevent any microbial contamination buildup. The ground over there on the right picture there shows a bunch of little dots that are little flakes of resin that are stuck to the ground. So this might be a little bit of an afterthought in an operations area, but Health Canada may very easily identify this as a contamination risk, especially if you're walking through there and potentially tracking that into other rooms. So you're going to want to clean that up as well as you can during your regular operations. And finally, to the bottom right over there is just a pool of sitting water in an operations area. Of course, this is a little bit more conducive to certain facilities such as greenhouses, but you do want to make sure that you address any kind of sitting pools of water because those do tend to build up bacteria quite quickly. And so that should be part of your cleaning schedule as well. Moving on to the next major area, which is record keeping. So you might think that record keeping concerns primarily your SOPs, but there's a lot more to record keeping than that. It includes also all of your forms and inventory logs, all of your logs for cleaning and calibration, environmental records. So everything that has a paper record to it, as well as an electronic record to it, is part of your record keeping system. And so keeping these up to date is extremely important. And there are definitely challenges with a micro in comparison to a standard that might not have potentially an electronic record keeping software to accomplish this. So one of the first things that Health Canada will look for during an inspection is they'll ask for your inventory log. So you have to produce your inventory log, and it should be up to date as it currently stands. So they'll be able to point at any particular lot or batch of cannabis, and you should be able to easily trace where it is and exactly the right quantity. As well, that leads into your transfer records as well. So if there is movement of cannabis, if you're logging that through transfer records, that should be able to be properly traced back to the original raw material quite easily. And so that obviously is a challenge for micros that don't have something like a video surveillance system where you can quickly go in and check the movement of cannabis between rooms. So you want to make sure the records are kept up to date in that regard. Health Canada will look at your sales records. They'll look at any product that you've released and make sure that the batch production records are up to date and that they've gone through all the proper checks in order to release your product. And with that, there's a lot of items included in your batch production records down to the raw materials received. So you want to make sure that those are complete and they're performed and completed in accordance with an approved SOP. Testing specifications is part of batch release and an important part too. So you want to make sure that you do have your approved testing specifications in hand before you can obtain a C of A for your product. And as well, you want to make sure that the testing specifications that you use the most up-to-date Pharmacopoeia references, which our partners at LabStat will talk a little bit more about in the next segment. Standard operating procedures, of course, are integral to record keeping. And so Health Canada will certainly request your master SOP list. So you should be able to provide that to them, as well as the effective dates of all your SOPs, showing when they were actually implemented. So effective dates are another very important thing to have on all of your SOPs, as well as a record of any of the change controls for any SOPs as well. So deviation reports and CAPAs are critical to any quality management system, where anytime you deviate from an SOP and the protocols within, you should be conducting a deviation report and putting one together. So that involves just identifying where the deviation happened and just keeping a proper record of that. If there's multiple deviations of the same sort occurring, then that means that that might escalate into a CAPA, or a corrective and preventative action, where you have to identify that this is an ongoing issue and present some ways for in some ways for you to prevent and mitigate this issue from happening in the future. This is the greatest way to demonstrate a history of compliance with Health Canada, is by showing them, hey, we do make mistakes, we address them, we have the change controls in place, and this is what we've done so far. That moves forward into complaints and adverse reaction records as well, where Health Canada will certainly ask for these. If hopefully you don't have any adverse reactions, but if you do have any complaints or otherwise, they will want to make sure that you have the proper investigation reports in place that identify these issues, that propose some corrective and preventative actions, and remediate the issue from happening in the future as well. Your cleaning and sanitation logs, as I mentioned in the past, those have to be kept up to date. And this is especially important for the rooms where you're actually doing your production. And even further is more important for sales inspections, particularly because the days that you conduct the production of your 2 batches or 4 batches that you submit for a sales amendment, the Health Canada can easily take a look and ask for the cleaning logs on those days to make sure that the rooms had all the proper cleaning protocols and checks in place. Supplier approval is another huge aspect that's often overlooked as well, because it's not very much mentioned within the regulations or the guidance documentation, but it's critical to a good quality system as well. You have to vet all of the vendors that you work with and suppliers, and you can do that by providing them with questionnaires, by asking them for the proper licensing, etc. And this is another thing that LabStat will talk to you about in the future. Now, with micros, this might be a little bit more challenging because you don't have the flexibility of being able to travel on site and audit these supplier facilities. So it's very important that you do have a system in place that you can properly vet them through paper records and keep that on file. Health Canada will look at your employee training logs as well and make sure that you're properly training any of your staff on SOPs for their particular job tasks, as well as any new SOPs or revised SOPs, and retraining appropriately. So overall, the completeness of your records, making sure that they're signed off by the correct authority like the QAP or a master grower, and making sure that the completion dates or effective dates are clearly written on the SOP, and that they're not, currently, there can be SOPs that are in draft, but that should be very well identified, and there should be an effective one that supersedes it in place. Finally, the preventative control plan is another one that Health Canada highlights often as being an area of non-compliance. You want to make sure that your PCP, when you're working with extracts or edibles, is up to date and reflective of the current process in place. Moving on to security. So with security for a micro, of course, you have slightly less requirements for physical security features compared to a standard, but they will still ask for similar things. They'll request your updated security floor plans, and these should outline all of the security measures that you do have in place and should be accurate to the current state of your facility. One of the big things for a micro that needs to be addressed is the limited access to your secure storage. And so providing Health Canada with an authorized list of individuals who have access to the facility and the secure storage is going to be important. They'll also ask for your security and incident reports. So if you do have a security breach, an unauthorized access report, a loss or theft situation, they do want to see those records and make sure that you've taken the appropriate steps to remediate all of those situations in a timely manner. Waste destruction records are also a big factor here, and this ties into inventory and record keeping as well. But you want to make sure that all of your waste destruction events are properly recorded. There's the proper witnesses there, one of whom has security clearance, and that it's all documented so that it can easily be reconciled with the inventory. The organizational security plan is one area that's also often overlooked, but an easy way to generate a minor or a major observation. Your OSP has to be a living document which is updated every time you have a new security cleared person or you have a change to your organizational structure. So Health Canada will ask for the OSP and make sure that it is reflective of the current state of your site. And if it's not, that can easily generate an observation. They'll also look at your security SOPs and see if there's any holes or gaps in your current processes that might cause a risk of diversion or loss of product. And finally, they will definitely verify that you are abiding by the limits of your micro license, and that they will go and check and measure your 200 square meters of canopy space for cultivators and make sure that you aren't receiving any more than 600 kilograms per year of dried cannabis equivalent as a processor. Of course, with a micro, you can go above and beyond the minimal security requirements and get things like a system of cameras, intrusion detection systems, access controls. And with that, if you do have those additional features, Health Canada could easily request things like your intrusion alarm reports, access reports, or even camera footage. So one thing that seems to be a bit uncertain for a lot of license holders is how inspection observations are classified by inspectors. So this is the general guideline for how inspectors can classify a given observation. So first of all, it's divided into three areas: minor, major, and critical, increasing in severity. And a minor is defined as a deficiency or a deviation from the Cannabis Act or regulations that is not likely to lead to a risk of diversion, or is not likely to prevent the detection of diversion, or is not likely to result in a health risk. Moving up in severity, a major is a deficiency or a deviation that may increase a risk of diversion, that may prevent detection of diversion, or may increase a health risk. And finally, a critical is a deficiency or deviation that will cause a risk of diversion, that will prevent detection of diversion, and will cause a health risk. Now, of course, there is some subjectivity to these observations between different inspectors, but keep in mind as well that if you do get a minor across two different inspections in a row, the second time it could be escalated into a major. The same thing for a major. If it happens more than once, it could become a critical. So some general parting advice for conducting your preparation for your upcoming inspection. Number one, ensure that your facility is clean and orderly. It's really easy to do that. Just make sure you've cleaned it up to the best that you can, that your maintenance checks have been performed on all the facilities as well as the equipment in place. You should assign an internal dedicated inspections team, which is dedicated to making sure that you abide by all of the regulatory requirements at your facility, and that they're responsible for conducting something like a mock audit of your production and and quality systems to ensure that you're meeting all of the requirements for GPP record keeping and security. You want to make sure that all of your staff is also understanding of what their responsibilities are during an inspection, especially for a smaller team. You might have a lot of different responsibilities. So make sure that everybody is well aware and of the day of the inspection. You want to ensure that your sanitation, calibration, environmental records are all complete and they're kept up to date. So this is especially important, as I mentioned, for a sales amendment in the rooms where the batches that you submitted were produced on those particular days. You also want to ensure that all of your activities involving cannabis are being conducted in accordance with standard operating procedures. So that is a regulation that has to be abided by, and that when you do have any deviations to your SOPs and protocols, that you do have a deviation report and an investigation to make sure that that is being mitigated in the future. You want to ensure that your inventory is also up to date and your batches and lots can very easily be identified and located within your facility by matching them with your inventory records. And they will test you on that. They'll find a random lot or batch and ask you to show it to them in the inventory. Ensure that there is no unlabeled cannabis in your facility. That's an easy one. All of your cannabis should be well accounted for, and everything should come with the proper lot number, tracking ID, and make sure that anything is accounted for and that there's no cannabis sitting around in non-operations areas, especially, or transit areas, and that everything is properly labeled. Ensuring that cannabis is also only stored in your secure storage is very important. So anything that's generally stored in a room over 24 hours is going to have to be stored in an approved secure storage. That doesn't include, obviously, grow rooms and drying rooms, for example, but in other operations areas that applies. Ensure finally that all of your released or sold batches or lots have completed batch production records. So ensuring that you've done all the checks in place to say that, hey, we've ensured that this product and batch is safe for human consumption or is safe to move on to the next stage of processing, and has given the final check mark from the relevant authority. Finally, very important to be honest and forthcoming with the regulators. Despite what some may think, the regulators aren't there to give you a hard time. They just want to make sure that you are conducting your activities in a compliant manner and that your activities are safe and are preventing any diversion or health risk. And so you want to be honest with them, and they do reward honesty with the license holders by making sure that that demonstrates a history of compliance. It demonstrates your commitment to compliance. And so if you do have an area that you feel like you're coming a little bit short or non-compliant, just let them know ahead of time. Tell them that you've taken steps to remediate that, and just be forthcoming and honest. So if you do have an inspection that's coming up, we're here to help you out. We've assisted a lot of our clients in the past with preparing for various types of inspections. And so whether it's conducting a mock audit of your facility in the eyes of a regulator, or if it's just giving you some general pointers on how to best prepare for your compliance inspection or address any kind of non-compliance that you feel like might come up during an inspection, give us a call. We'll give you a free consultation and we'll talk to you about what's the best path forward for you. And very much looking forward to answering any of your questions on the Q&A session after this. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Dario, for a great overview of regulatory inspections and inspection readiness. Having participated in dozens of inspections over the last 15 years, I can't stress enough the importance of inspection readiness and preparedness. Your presentation highlighted some of the key points that I had to learn the hard way. Another very important yet often overlooked component of a well-organized quality system that is subject to inspection are a set of well-designed specifications for your product. In the next 15 to 20 minutes, I'd like to take you through the process of setting specifications. In this portion of the webinar, we will start by defining what is a specification, follow that with a discussion of the elements of a specification, and finally marry up the specification with the certificate of analysis provided to you by your laboratory. Lastly, I will briefly touch on how you can use your specification to assist in selection and qualification of a testing laboratory. To kick off this discussion, I thought it would be best to formally define what a specification is. While I am sure most of you have an idea of what a specification is, starting from a formal definition ensures we have the right framework for the rest of the discussion. As you can see here, a specification is a technical document that defines a set of criteria to which a product should conform in order to be considered acceptable for its intended use. Specifications are key documents that are recognized by Health Canada as an essential tool to be used in cannabis production to ensure a consistent quality product is produced over many batches. A specification typically lists all required tests, references to analytical procedures or test methods to be used, and the acceptance criteria. We will go into each one of these elements in the next few slides. A specification has three uses in your operation. First, specifications are used to determine the minimum quality standards of input raw materials. Second, specifications are used to define acceptable ranges for in-process control testing. In-process controls are commonly used to demonstrate a manufacturing process is under control, helping to ensure the quality of the final product. Lastly, specifications are used to define the minimum quality standards of your final product that your final product must meet in order to release the product to the market. For the rest of this webinar, we will focus our attention on the final release specifications. However, if you have any questions about setting specifications for raw materials or in-process controls, please contact us after the webinar and we would be happy to set up a consultation call. Having defined what a specification is in the previous slide, here I am showing you an example of what a final release specification might look like for a cannabis flower finished product. This specification can be organized in many different ways. Over the years, I've seen specifications that I would call conversational. These specifications describe each test method and acceptance criteria in full sentences and paragraphs. I've seen many more specifications that are tabular and provide concise details as to the test method and acceptance criteria. My recommendation, especially if you've never set a specification before, is to keep it simple. Keep your specification tabular and easy to read and understand. Regardless of how you choose to organize your specification, it must define the following elements. It must have the required testing, reference to any analytical test method to be used, and the acceptance criteria. Additional required information on the specification included on your specification is the name of the product, the part number, revision number of the specification, effective date, and approvals. These last three elements are essential elements from a quality perspective, as they demonstrate control and approval of these specifications by your quality group. These elements are expected by Health Canada as demonstration of control on these documents. So now let's start to dissect what the elements are on this example specification. In the first column, you'll see the required tests. Often a single test may have multiple components. Take, for example, the cannabinoid content. In this case, it's important to list out each component you want reported on this final certificate of analysis in this specification. In the middle column is a listing of the test methods. This can be a combination of internal test methods, external test methods from your laboratory, or compendial methods. We'll dig a bit deeper into test methods in a couple of slides. Lastly, you'll see a set of clearly defined acceptance criteria. These criteria can be numeric, descriptive, as is in the case of the appearance, or can simply be a requirement to record or report the result. So if you're anything like me, at this point you're saying, yeah, I got it. Required tests, test methods, acceptance criteria, done. This is sometimes easier said than done, however. The real issue becomes what tests should you include on your product specification? To answer that question, we need to define the concept of attributes. Attributes are characteristics of your product that can have an effect on the final product quality. For example, the THC content will have an obvious impact on product quality, but so will the terpene profile. We now take the concept of attributes a step further and define critical quality attributes. These are attributes that are critical to your product's quality, and these attributes must meet the defined acceptance criteria to ensure a reproducible quality product. In the previous example, the THC content would be an example of a critical quality attribute, whereas the terpene profile is an attribute. The differentiator in this case is the efficacy of the final product. The terpene profile will have an impact on the flavor of the product, but not necessarily its efficacy. Thus, it is considered an attribute. A critical quality attribute must be on your specification. Additional attributes should be added to ensure your product meets your standards and are reproducibly, and that your batches are reproducible batch over batch. In general, certain critical quality attributes, such as identification, assay, and impurities, are expected on every specification. Additional attributes, such as terpenes or authenticity, can be included at your discretion. Additionally, Health Canada has prescribed certain critical quality attributes that must be included on your specification. For example, a dried flower specification must include identification, assay of cannabinoids, impurities, including heavy metals, pesticide residues, and aflatoxins, and microbiological examination. Now that we have established the necessary quality attributes that should be on a specification, the next step is to define how those attributes are to be tested. This is typically done through a document called a test method. Test methods contain all information necessary to reproducibly execute the test time after time after time by different analysis and different instrumentation or different instruments. Much like specifications, test methods can take several different forms. Again, they can be conversational with long written descriptions of each step by step, so that they can be followed, or they can be tabular. In my experience, the best test methods are a combination of the two. A good test method will be well organized and will employ an economy of words to ensure instructions are clear, concise, and correct. As seen in this slide, a well-written text method should contain the following elements: an overview, which defines the scope for which the method is applicable, a list of reagents and materials needed, instructions on how to prepare the standards and samples, obviously how to conduct the analysis, and finally how to analyze the data. Unless you are fortunate enough to have a laboratory as part of your operation, you likely won't need to write test methods. That said, understanding what elements are in a test method will be crucial in evaluating the credibility and perspective of a prospective testing laboratory. A very well written and organized test method is a leading edge indicator that the results your lab is providing you will be accurate and reproducible. Another expectation that Health Canada will have is that test methods that are used to assess product quality be validated. In particular, Health Canada requires methods for cannabinoid assay, pesticide residues, residual solvents, and microbiological examination to be validated. It's not my intention to provide a detailed discussion of method validation here. If you are interested in method validation, we recently held a webinar entirely devoted to method validation. Contact us after this webinar, and we'd be happy to provide you access to the previous webinar. So what is method validation? In a nutshell, method validation is a series of experiments that demonstrate an analytical method is suitable for its intended purpose. A validation should prove that the test method be accurate, repeatable, precise over a linear range of concentrations. If your laboratory uses an internally developed method, the lab itself must perform the validation studies in their lab. If your lab is using a standard method from an organization such as the Pharmacopoeia or an ASTM, validation may not be necessary. For example, pharmacopoeia methods are already validated and do not require full validation. There is an expectation by the regulators, however, that if your lab is using pharmacopoeia methods, the lab is verified that that method is suitable for use in their laboratory. This process is called method verification. In the previous slide, I mentioned that some organizations publish standard methods that are generally accepted suitable for use in any laboratory. One such set of organizations that publish these are called pharmacopoeias. These publications generally have two sections. The first section is called the general chapters and define general test methods such as loss on drying and sulfated ash. The general chapters also provide general guidance on more complex tests such as gas chromatography or liquid chromatography. The second section are referred to as monographs. A monograph can be thought of as a single document that contains both the specification and all test methods on the specification in one document. A monograph is usually written for a single active ingredient or product. There may be many pharmacopoeia methods currently in publication. There are many pharmacopoeias currently in publication. Typically, they apply to a particular jurisdiction or geographical region. For example, the USP is the US Pharmacopoeia, the EP is the European Pharmacopoeia, the BP, the British Pharmacopoeia, and JP, the Japanese Pharmacopoeia. Each pharmacopoeia may have slightly different procedures for a particular test, so they cannot necessarily be interchanged. For example, microbiological examination, the USP has the general chapters USP 2021 and USP 2022 for products of botanical origin. The EP has EP chapter 2.6.12 and 2.6.13. While these two cover the same pathogens in both chapters, the procedures are slightly different between the two. That said, the Cannabis Act allows for the use of either the USP or EP for the determination of impurities such as heavy metals and microbiological examination. If you choose to use a pharmacopoeia method on your specification, you must clearly identify which pharmacopoeia and which general chapter you are specifying. A last note on pharmacopoeias is that they do change over time. You should always make sure that you are referencing the correct revision of the general chapter on your specification. If you are unsure about what is the current pharmacopoeia for a general method, please reach out to us and we'd be happy to assist. So here is an example of some specific guidance provided in a general chapter of the Pharmacopoeia. And this excerpt is from the European Pharmacopoeia chapter 2.8.20 for sampling botanical products. You can see from these guidelines, they are for sampling the product post-harvest and packaging. So for example, if after harvest you have 200 containers of product, you should be sampling the square root of 200 plus 1 containers or 15 containers. Similarly, the total mass of the batch is between 200 kilograms. Then the total mass of the 15 samples taken from the 15 containers should be no less than 0.25% of the total mass or 500 grams. This equates to 33.3 grams per sample. I know this may seem a bit confusing, but it will become second nature the more you use the monographs and guidelines, and the more you think about how the use of the Pharmacopoeia general chapters can be used to test your products. Additionally, we are always here to help and welcome the chance to talk with you about pharmacopoeia chapters and how they can be applied in your specifications. As I alluded to earlier, a monograph is a combination of specification and all test methods for that product. I reiterate this point here because as of today, there is no official monograph for any cannabis product. Having a set of monographs for cannabis products would provide a standard framework that would ensure the laboratories are testing all cannabis products in a similar manner. Such standardization of testing would give you the producers assurances that regardless of who tests your products, the assessment of your product's quality will be accurate and precise. We here at LabStat feel that a standard monograph for cannabis product is necessary, and we will be working with trade organizations to push for standardization of testing in the cannabis space. Okay, so the next step in setting up the specification is define acceptance criteria. The acceptance criteria define the minimum standards your product must meet to be deemed acceptable to release to the market. Typically, these are numeric results of the test performed. For example, the cannabinoid assay should provide you a numeric value of how much THC is present in your sample. If this measured value must be within the limits set by your acceptance criteria. Using the cannabinoid content example, say your specification is set that the THC content must be between 15 and 25% by weight. This would be written as not less than, or NLT 15, which is less than or equal to 15%, and not more than NMT, which is greater than or equal to 25%. If the cannabinoid assay determines that your product is 17% THC, has 17% THC by weight, your product meets the quality standards and can be released. Conversely, if your product assays at 12% by weight, then the product does not meet the quality standard and thus cannot be released to the market. This last example drives home the importance of acceptance criteria. It is critically important that acceptance criteria be a balance of quality and manufacturability. Too tight a specification range and good batches will unnecessarily be rejected. Too wide a specification range and bad batches will be accepted. If you have questions around setting appropriate acceptance criteria, again, please contact us and we can discuss with you further. The definition of acceptance criteria not only set the pass-fail criteria, but also set the significance of the reported number. For example, a specification of 2% will require the final of whole number 2 will require the final result to be rounded to the nearest whole number. Whereas the specification of 2.00 will require that the final result be rounded to at the hundredth place. The choice of significance does have some impact and implication on the range of values that can be rounded and considered acceptable. As a rule of thumb, the less number of significant figures, the wider range of values that will round to a conforming result. So in this example, if the specification is 2, then you could have up to 2.5 and 1.5 round to 2. So you have a full percentage point of acceptable range. However, if the specification is 2.00, then you are allowed 1.95 to 2.05 as an acceptable range with rounding rules, which gives you a 0.01% window. So you can see how the definition of the definition of the precision of the number will impact the range of allowable values. So in this last section, I want to show you how the specification you set translates to the certificate of analysis your lab will provide you. The certificate of analysis is the documented proof that the lab has completed the testing and the results of those tests. So here is an example of a certificate of analysis. Much like the specification, the certificate of analysis should provide a list of all tests performed, the acceptance criteria, the result obtained, the test method used, who performed the test, and the date the test was conducted, and finally where the test was performed. The key link is that every test prescribed on the specification must be on the certificate of analysis. The certificate of analysis must also allow the reader to determine if the attributes have met the acceptance criteria. This is accomplished by including both the result and acceptance criteria. Here we can see that the total CBD content was specified to be not less than 0% and not more than 10%. From this certificate of analysis, we can determine that the product met the specification with a result of 0.052%. It is also, it is also important to understand how data is being reported on your certificate of analysis by your lab. For example, flour is graded based on the cannabinoid content, which is expressed as a percent value. What does that percentage actually mean? In the strictest definition, that percentage represents the total weight of the THC divided by the total weight of the sample multiplied by 100. If you say, however, that you have a product that tests at 20% total THC, obviously total THC is the combination of THC and THCA. But how does the lab actually calculate this total THC value? The simplest way is just to straight sum the percentages. However, there is an issue there. If you have 1 billion molecules of THC and 1 billion molecules of THCA in 2 separate containers, the 2 containers will have different weights. So if we just sum the percentages, we are not actually reporting apples, we're reporting apples and oranges. This is because their molecular structures are slightly different, causing the THCA to be slightly heavier than the THC. If I just sum the 2 percentages, I'm not accounting for this weight difference and thus underestimating the total THC content. Thus, we have to apply a conversion factor to the THCA percentage, which corrects for the weight difference. Some labs may add a further correction factor to account for incomplete conversion between THC and THCA, but the industry standard is just to account for the differences in their molecular weights. Again, the more time you spend thinking about these concepts, the more in focus they will become, but you have to put the effort in and ask lots of questions. At the end of the day, the lab will send you anything you ask for. It's up to you to be informed as a consumer, and good labs will help you make sure that you are an informed consumer, and you should never shy away from asking your labs lots of questions about how they report their results. Finally, I want to briefly discuss how you can use your specification to help choose a laboratory and develop a long-lasting partnership with that laboratory. Choosing a laboratory should never be done solely based on price. You should also think of choosing your testing laboratory as a process of selecting a business partner. This partner is vital to verifying your product quality and protecting your brand, so choose wisely. To give you a few quick insights into selecting a new laboratory, here are some questions you can ask your lab. Use these points as themes and develop a set of questions for each theme. The more you engage your lab during the selection process, the less surprises you'll have in the future. Compile a list of questions from each theme and send it to your lab to assess their quality systems and the quality of data you can expect from the lab. One of the best ways to start the conversation covering these questions is to share your product specification with the laboratory. Walk through the specification test by test, inquiring about their internal test methods. Is the method validated? How are their results documented? How is the integrity of the data stewarded to? The specification is an excellent tool to evaluate the laboratory on the exact testing procedures you will require from them. With that, I would like to wrap up the discussion of specifications. I hope you have found the information informative and helpful. I encourage you to join us in the breakout rooms if you have any questions, and I'll be happy to share my experiences in setting specifications and how specifications are scrutinized during the regulatory inspection. Lastly, I'd like to thank you for your time. I know that you are busy and appreciate the opportunity to share this information with you. And now I'll turn it over to Rachel for closing remarks. Rachel, back to you.
Amazing. Dario, Devin, such great information. Thank you both so much for spending time with us today and sharing all of your expertise. I know the chat's going and I think people are going to have lots of questions for you. So everyone, again, please stay tuned. If you have more time to stick with us, these two geniuses and more people from their teams are going to come on. You're going to click over here to the sidebar. You're going to move into the sessions. So out of this main stage and into the sessions where you'll find these folks and their team members. Who do we have joining us today, and what are you guys going to be talking about in these breakout rooms? Give me a little lowdown.
Yeah, for sure. Excited about the breakout rooms after this for sure. In my room, I'll be in one room, and we're going to be talking all about sales amendment preparation, your documentation and site readiness. How are you going to prepare for and what to expect from a Health Canada inspection when applying specifically for a sales amendment? So I'll be in that room as well as with my associate Dana Baranowski. As well, we're going to have another breakout room as well, where we're going to be talking about general inspection preparation, so GPP, security, and record keeping. So what a Health Canada inspection looks like, and general inspection preparation, how to ensure that you're best prepared. So our CSO, Lucas McCann, is going to be leading that session, along with our other associates, Vanessa Barros and Callan Evans. So it should be exciting.
Awesome. Stacked team. Lots of great opportunities to get your questions answered. And Devin, who's joining us from LabStat?
Yeah, from LabStat, we have Andrew Gerard, who's the general manager of our Edmonton facility, and Robert Stewart, who is our vice president of business development. And we're going to be talking about everything testing cannabis and, selecting a lab, setting specs, any questions you got.
Awesome. So bring all those COA questions, because I know everybody's talking about how do you read that dang COA?
Fair enough.
Great. Okay. So again, everyone, we're going to move into the sessions. So we're going to all move from these rooms. You're going to pop over to the session section. You'll see the rooms laid out that these gentlemen just told you about. Select your room and pop on in there and ask them your burning questions. Thank you again for joining us today. There will be a recording provided of this webinar shortly thereafter, after today. So you'll get that in an email. Look for that. And we'll see you for episode number 3 really soon. Thanks so much, everybody. See you in the breakout rooms.